hello again. Welcome into 101.7 FM and 710 KEEL. Welcome into another edition of Strategies for Living. I'm marriage and family therapist David McMillan. Look yonder, way down there. At the other side of the broadcast table, there she is, PLPC Carla McCormick.
I was trying to get our Facebook page up on my phone.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I have to see if our illustrious producer over there makes me look like Conehead or, kind of like a Cyclops.
Would Travis Stewart make you look any way except lovely and beautiful? We're talking about we can't call him the ace of the airways because Ruben won't let us do that while he's away. But he's fast becoming ace.
Travis Stewart. He's doing a pretty good job.
You are doing a good job. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, you've managed to keep us flying, high, low, and in between, just like Ruben does.
Flying somewhat straight.
Yeah, somewhat straight. Yeah. Let me ask both of you a question. What's the first thing that comes into your mind when I say the word power?
Strength.
Travis, what comes into your mind when you hear the word power?
I was going to say strong and strength, yeah.
Okay. Well, I think you guys are at the starting point. Really all social relationships, if you think about it, are laden with power. And we're going to talk about that. And we're going to try to understand and look at power dynamics today with Cindy Suarez, who is our life strategist. So we'll meet her when we come back. In the meantime, folks, thank you for tuning in to Strategies for Living this evening. We are presented by CADA, the Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse of Northwest Louisiana. They've been helping individuals and families for 60 years now. And you don't need to leave home to seek treatment. You can do that right here with CADA. We're also brought to you by Jerry Anderson State Farm Insurance. We're brought to you by Learning RX, by Highland Place Rehab and Nursing Center, by Jacob's Well Inspirational Books and Gifts, and by Resilient House. Talking about the power manual, how we're going to master complex power dynamics. We'll come back and meet Cindy Suarez, our life strategist, today. Welcome back. Welcome back into 101.7 FM and 710 KEEL. Welcome back into Strategies for Living. I'm marriage and family therapist David McMillan with PLPC Carla McCormick. Let's welcome to the program now Cindy Suarez, who is our life strategist. She works with leaders in nonprofit organizations, philanthropy, and social movements, including most recently the Movement for Black Lives. She has helped social change leaders move from struggle to flow by helping them build elegant ideas and structures. She has a master's degree in nonprofit management from Southern New Hampshire University, studied feminist theory at the New School for Social Research, and she's the senior editor at Nonprofit Quarterly, the leading nonprofit journal. She is the author of The Power Manual, new book out from New Society Publishers, How to Master Complex Power Dynamics. Cindy Suarez. Mrs. Suarez, welcome to Strategies.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for being here. So you've been writing this book a long time. You say since you were a teenager?
Oh, I've been thinking about it since then. I started writing it about 5 years ago, and I have been thinking about it since then. I feel like I always knew I would write the book, and I just knew that I had to do some living first.
So, what exactly is? How do you define power? What is power, Cindy?
Well, that was the underlying question for me, and I looked at different types of power, but I start off in the first chapter by differentiating between two types of power: dominant power or supremacist power, and liberatory power. And that's actually a key shift in the conversation about power. A lot of the thinking about power lies in different fields of study, from neuroendocrinology to the Vedic scriptures. So looking at all of these, I really found that these were the two core types of power that they all spoke to.
And it's
so
all,
that the whole book stems from that distinction.
It's all relational, right? I mean, all social relations are really
Yes.
about power, aren't they?
Yes, I think so. I think people think of power as structure a lot, especially now that's the language, especially of people who are trying to change around power. The language is around changing systems and structures. But I find that it is really about relationships of power. That's where it starts, and all the structures that come out of those ways of interacting are the artifacts of those interactions.
I when I think of power, I think of a title of a book. I actually interviewed this author many years ago. The book title I loved the title, Power versus Force. Guy by the name of Dr. David Hawkins. Do you distinguish between power and force? Is there a difference?
I don't, not specifically. I was really looking at power in terms of liberation and domination. And I think there are many different ways to talk about power, but I think for me it was really politicized. It was really about how we structure society and resources and stratify people.
Help us to understand, really, as we begin to look at power, Cindy. What are the theories of power that?
What are the theories of power?
Yeah. What do you look at in terms of the theories of power?
Well, in this book, I actually started by looking at the different ideas that influenced me. I've been studying power in some way or another since I was a teenager, and I went to grad school and different programs and studied it throughout and read throughout my life and worked in the sector and movements, as you say. So I feel like this is a topic I've been really wrestling with and trying to understand for many decades. And I think that in this book, what I did was I started by looking at the different ideas that influenced me and the new thinking that was emerging from that field. And I look at different fields of study. So rather than theories, I think there are many theories. Like I said, I looked at the field of neuroendocrinology, which is one of the newest, which is really the study of hormones and how power plays out in the body, how interactions between people show up, and how our body shifts, how it uses its resources, its glucose, to politics, to business management, developmental psychology, So I looked at all these different ways of talking about power, with the axis being domination, liberation. People are really trying to become more fulfilled or more themselves or more powerful.
That's the way that I would distinguish the domination thing. Would be the way that I would distinguish power versus force. I would say force is the domination. True power flows from within. You point out in the book it's relational. It's also exercised. It's not really acquired, is it?
Yeah. I mean, it's something that we have to enact. And that's why the relationships and interactions become such a pivotal point to understand, because power does get structured and does get passed down as ways of being, but really we activate or interrupt those power dynamics in our interactions. So ultimately, at the core, which is what I was looking for, I mean, part of the inspiration for writing this or a goal was that as I grew in thinking about this and as I saw what was happening around me in the environment, I felt like the conversations around it were becoming so complicated and less human. So I thought, that there needs to be a way that people can enter this conversation. There are so many things you can know about power. How do you have a conversation that's real, that really allows people who care to understand, who might be speaking different languages around it or in general, to really talk to each other. So I think relationships are the most human, as human as you can get, in interactions at the core.
It's interesting because you gave an example early on in the book. The book is The Power Manual, How to Master Complex Power Dynamics. It's out from New Society Publishers. You talked about Otto Scharmer and Ursula Verstegen. I hope I'm saying those names correctly. I'm close, I hope.
Yeah, you are.
They're German. They worked in Frankfurt, Germany. They worked with a network of physicians to improve emergency care, and they conducted over 100 interviews with both patients and physicians. And what did they learn about power? What did they learn?
That was a really interesting story. I read that book years before I started writing mine, but that story really is what I remember the most about that book. And I actually know Otto. He's in Boston, and in that story, what he does is he really helps shift a whole system. In this case, a healthcare system that's a network, by focusing on the relationships that people are having. And originally the challenge was inefficiencies. And what was really interesting about this is that they did not convene the executives to figure out what the strategy would be to minimize inefficiencies. What they did was talk to the two core groups, the doctors and the patients. And like you said, they interviewed 100 of them, and they asked them the same two questions. What relationships are you having currently, and what kind of relationships would you like to have? And then they aggregated that data, and they found the same 4 levels across both groups. The lower level was sort of the mechanic. I'm sick, I come, you fix me. It's the lowest intervention.
Is that the transactional then?
Yes, that's the transactional.
Yeah.
It's
Patient comes in with a problem, physician fixes it, right? Basically.
Exactly. Yeah, there's no talk about what's causing it, but it's just a problem that gets fixed. The next level up is, behavior. The doctor may be helping the patient understand the behavior that's causing the problem, and that's
so what's got to change then? So the physicians comes in and said, "This has got to change if you want to get better," and then the patient tries to change it. That's the
right. Tries to get a little bit more to the root of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
A higher level up would be different behavior. Would be, what is the kind of thinking that's leading to this behavior? So it's a little bit deeper. It gets at the core structures, and then at the highest level.
So that's the assumptive. That's the assumptive level. The physician kind of helps the patient to understand what's being assumed here.
Exactly.
What thinking gets into the behavior, and so the thinking's got to change.
That's not even. People aren't often even aware of that.
Right.
And then the highest level is, you see this illness as a sign that your life is trying to make.
So that's
And
the
you have to figure
identity
out-
level. That,
Exactly. Yeah. And so it was really interesting to both. I mean, I think the first realization that was really powerful for both groups when they were brought together to share the findings was that they agreed on the same level. So the fact that they agreed on that. And then the fact that they both thought that they were having the bottom two, and they both wanted to have the top two. And just that understanding changed what they did. So the idea was that they would go back and they would, with the same resources, with the same structures, just behave differently, knowing that. And after a few months, from what they found was that the whole network had changed, and the top level started to try to figure out what happened to make this team so effective. And I think what's powerful about that is not just that this core, showing the core function of the relationship, but also that change doesn't have to happen at the top. That really it's people who are engaged together at any level of a system can change it.
we have a lot to learn, obviously, about power, and we're talking to Cindy Suarez today. She is the author of The Power Manual, out from New Society Publishers. At your favorite bookstore right now. How to master complex power dynamics. We're talking about it today here on Strategies for Living. Be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Welcome back into Strategies for Living. Marriage and family therapist David McMillan, PLPC, Carla McCormick, here on 101.7 FM and 710 KEEL. And we are with our life strategist today, Cindy Suarez. She's the author of The Power Manual, How to Master Complex Power Dynamics. You can find it at your favorite bookseller right now, out from New Society Publishers. I love your publishers, Cindy. They put out some great books.
Oh, they're great. Yeah.
So we begin to learn this as little bitty people, don't we? We learn about power as a child, basically
Yeah.
through our interactions with other people, mainly our parents, right?
Yes, that's one of the things about power. Is it's developmental, which is helpful once you know that, and it begins as a child, especially as a 2-year-old, when
Right.
one starts to make demands on one's environment.
So, and I'm assuming we go through, as we develop. I mean, 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds kind of the world revolves around them.
Right. Right. It's a fine, delicate balance to try to both teach them about the world and also give them, negotiate with them with the demands that they're making or the things that they want, because that's how they learn how to engage others. First, that there are others, and then how to engage them and how to engage them from a place of power.
Right.
Cindy, seems like such a big, broad topic to me, and I'm like intrigued by the thought of power in a different way than I guess I've kind of looked at it. So, do you believe that we're kind of born into a certain power strata, so to speak, and that we spend our lives trying to get out of that strata, or we use that strata to help the people below us and raise our level? Help me to understand kind of your kind of thought on this.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point. In the book, I get into that, the fact that there are actually 2 types of status. At that point, I'm talking about it as status, which is a really core aspect of power. How does one fare in relationship to others around one? And with that, there's 2 things. There's the status that society assigns to you, and there's the status that you play. And if you think of it simply as dominant and subordinate, there are some things that have been found about that. One is that if you are assigned a low status in society, you're expected to play a low status. And if you don't play a low status, then oftentimes the reaction is negative. On the flip side of that, if you are born and society assigns a high status to you and you play a low status because it's not expected, then it's rewarded. It's thought of as humility instead of a high way of being. So there are different ways that we maneuver, but essentially there's the power that we play and the power that society assigns us, and those are oftentimes in conflict.
So being a woman, you would automatically receive a lower status in, like, let's say in our culture. So these power struggles, I mean, obviously they change from culture to culture, but do the same struggles exist in different cultures that exist here in the United States? Is that does it play out the same way?
Well, that's the interesting thing that I found in the book is not only does it exist across cultures, but it's even played by the people who are trying to change the status quo and power dynamics. So it's true power is so, it functions by being invisible. It functions by being, the accepted way of being, so to speak. So in the book, I outline the patterns of domination. And these are all, tolerance, objectification, being objective, assimilation, objectivity. These are all things that are not only accepted but considered to be ideal in our society. So, it just shows how pervasive it is. The dominant way of being is actually built into how we think of what would be considered an ideal citizen.
So in terms of the liberatory power, really, we're talking about developing our consciousness, aren't we?
Yes, developing our consciousness and shaping our actions so that we are able to create the world we want and a world that's more mutual. But essentially, yes, consciousness and choice, becoming conscious of choice so that you can actually make certain choices and even know what you want.
So, we then, to me, as we develop further and further, we gain more power to create our lives.
Yes.
more and more. What?
What's the opposite of power?
Great question.
Powerlessness.
But how does that manifest itself?
It's very pervasive, probably more than we think. I mean, oftentimes, and we all play because, like you said, being a woman is one thing, but being a white woman is different from being a woman of color, from being a poor woman, from being an educated woman. So we all have different ways that we play power and play powerlessness. We may not perceive it that way. So one of the ways that a lot of people, that I've actually noticed this more and more recently, with a lot of my friends and people that come to me with their power problems, is that oftentimes people come to me with a challenge, and the way they even frame the challenge, there isn't even awareness of not only their power in that dynamic, but what they want out of that dynamic, out of that situation. So oftentimes, I mean, at the real core level, power shapes desire. Power shapes even what we allow ourselves to know, to want, that we want, as opposed to what we should want. So there are many levels that it plays out, and part of it is really not even being in true touch with what we truly desire.
Is that really the inner? Is that you talk about in the book the supreme choice? The mastery over our inner experience. Is that what you're touching on here, Cindy?
Yeah, it's definitely part of that. I mean, when you start to think about this, really a whole world opens up, and a lot of that is internal. It's external too. It's in watching interactions and understanding the signs and knowing how to intervene towards the future or the present that we want. But it's also internally in how we. The first chapter of my book is identity, how we even identify. Do we identify as powerful or powerless? I mean, oftentimes we see people that are fighting for power, and the whole narrative and the whole language is one of powerlessness. So it's very, very prevalent.
You touched on in the book one of my heroes of psychology, William Glasser, the late Dr. William Glasser, who is famous for early in his life creating reality therapy, later in his life choice theory. Dr. Glasser, I had the pleasure to meet and spend time with him. He was a guest on this show many times before he passed. But you say that according to his choice theory, one chooses everything that one experiences, and that includes if we feel misery, right? Yeah.
I mean, that was really fascinating. I mean, his work is one that I sort of found more recently as I looked at the sort of more newer theories of power, and this one, like you said, from psychology. And I totally resonate with what he said. It's very true. I mean, we don't think that we're choosing our misery, but we can. I mean, what we make of our experiences is up to us.
So mastery then is really an ability to focus our attention so that we can derive joy even from the mundane, even from just day-to-day experiences.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's a discipline. Most of our choice, as the second section on choice points out, it happens in unconscious space. So even moving more and more of our choice to conscious space, to intentional choice, helps with that. So it's not something that we are bound to. We can overcome it, and that's where skill and development comes in. Choice is something we learn, and we can choose to create the story of our experiences and to figure out what we're really wanting and to focus our energy on that. And by energy, I mean attention. Whatever we focus on grows, and our attention actually has a body aspect, which is the glucose that we use up. And that whole section on choice was actually really an interesting one to put into the conversation, because it shows how most choice is unconscious for a reason. It's because it takes a lot of energy to make conscious choice all the time. So we have evolved a consciousness that makes most of our choice, assuming that a lot of them are unimportant, unconscious. So, that's where our power comes in, making them conscious and tapping into what we really want.
And really, ultimately, we're creating our own identities, aren't we?
we are. We may have an identity handed to us by society, but we have full control over the one we create.
Well, we definitely have an identity handed to us by our society, by our, beginning with our families, the systems that we're in, that are early on, our families, our neighborhoods, our culture,
That's our ego.
Cool.
maybe our church. Yeah, that's our ego. That's our operating system, if you will. And for many of us, I think that just runs and runs, doesn't it? Runs the show until
Right.
until we hit a book like this, and we go, aha, wait, whoa, what's Cindy saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm interested in hearing what does it feel like to encounter this thinking, because I've been thinking about this for a long time. So, what did you think?
In
How
term,
did it disrupt? How did it refigure?
well, for me, some of this is in different language than we talk about. But this, actually, Cindy, Carla and I talk a lot about this stuff. We just use some different language, like Carla just used the ego, the operating system, and you to me, the way I'm impacted by your book is I see the Power Manual as being more of a how-to.
Yes.
Yeah, more of a how-to. Okay, well, now that I'm aware that that I've got this ego, I've got this operating system that was largely programmed for me. Beginning in my family, but then moving way beyond that, into our society, our culture, our nation, our world, and all the systems that we're part of. I see your book and the way it impacted me as I looked at this, and ultimately the reason I chose to invite you on the program is I see this as a how-to manual.
Yes, and then the power of it, thank you, the power of it is that just knowing these frameworks and practices is the first step.
Yeah.
And I've heard from many friends who've read different drafts and versions over the past few years tell me their stories, even before the book was published, on how they were in an interaction, they felt something was wrong, and they sort of remembered that there was this framework, and they actually could understand what was happening, and they could figure out what to do next. So I think even just knowing, a lot of this is at the level of consciousness, just knowing the language and the contours of that sort of invisible world helps us.
Yeah. And we got to take a break here. When we come back, you talk in the book about some of the rites of passage. I want to talk a little bit about that when we come back. And then I want to get into something very intriguing that you talk about, which is games and even playing.
Yeah.
Playing with power.
Fun. This could be fun.
Yeah, I can't wait. We're talking to Cindy Suarez today. The book is The Power Manual, How to Master Complex Power Dynamics. Carla's going to dominate me before this is all over.
You just roll right over.
We'll be right back. Welcome back. Welcome back into Strategies for Living. 1017 FM, 710 KEEL. Welcome back. I'm marriage and family therapist David McMillan. URPLPC Carla McCormick.
I am. Hey,
And Cindy Suarez, the author of The Power Manual, is our life strategist today.
so Cindy, I have a question. Whenever you are speaking to young women, how do you explain power to them, and what message do you want them to get, like, from a book like yours?
That's an interesting one. It depends who they are. I think a lot of times I don't speak necessarily. I mean, I think a lot of it is just in how I am in a space, and that can be taken different ways depending on the receiver. So I think when people come, when I get to know people and they ask questions, or if I'm working with them and we begin to interact, I think they soon learn that I approach things differently. And it's something that's similar to what David said, is that I'm using different language, and people often pick up on that. That's intentional. So part of it is in the language I use, and part of it is in how I show up. And if I get close enough to someone where we actually talk about it, it oftentimes centers around something that's happening for them in the world, and the interpretation of that. So, I don't. It's interesting. I do have young women that approach me with an eye towards being mentored or coached in some way, but I find myself really trying to emphasize more mutual relationships. So I'm very careful about what I say, and it's usually in relationships with something someone's asking me. So I'm very careful about just giving advice. I really respect where people are, and it depends on the interaction and who they are, how close they are. I choose how deep I go because I do see things differently. So sometimes it takes effort to talk and to share a different idea about power.
You talk about threshold. You say a threshold occurs, Cindy, when one is presented with a challenge that you can't meet without transcending your current idea of yourself.
Yes.
So, what would be is there an example of that? Can you think of an example of that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, a more recent one is just, I recently made a shift after working in the nonprofit sector and civil society for many years, even decades, to shift to writing. In order to shift to writing, especially as someone who grew up, working class in a Puerto Rican household, no matter that I went to school for many years and have various degrees and studied theory, and that's the world I live in, I still had to sort of shift the way that I saw myself, to see myself as a writer, to think that these ideas are important to other people besides myself. So all of those things, even the trust that it took to not take jobs that I didn't want for a few years until I could figure out the kind of job that would honor where I felt I was. And that did eventually happen, and I have a job writing in the sector, which I love. And so through that process, from shifting from doing that sort of nonprofit work as a consultant, also to being a writer and to really thinking about ideas, which is something I've always known I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And even knowing that I wanted to do that and spending my whole life, when it came time to do it, it took about 3 years, and that was the process of building new networks, letting go of things I didn't want, and continuing to imagine what I wanted until it appeared, and to have faith. So that was a threshold for me, and that's a big one. That's the kind of threshold that I talked about as a phase in one's life that changes. There are also everyday thresholds in our interactions with people, where the way I am is interacting with the way someone else is, and oftentimes that requires some sort of expansion on someone's part. So there are big shifts in our life, and there are also small everyday choices, but the one I described would be a big one.
This got my attention in the book, and that is play as evolution. And then you followed that with what? So yeah, play abounds in nature. And this really stretched me. This really made me think. The more developed the species, the more it seems to play.
What do you mean, are you talking like actual play, like play with each other, like chimpanzees or whales or something?
Well,
Yeah, there are actually different types of play.
yeah.
And in the book, there's actually a section that outlines. I mean, when I started looking at this, it was something unexpected for me as well. I think as I was finishing the book, this last section was actually going to be a second book, and the society said, no, we have to make this all one book. Because the first book was kind of had a lot of frameworks and practices, but it was more theoretical. And the second book, I wanted it to be about this discovery that I had made, which was that, play was not only a way for developing and innovating and evolving, but that it was also a core and if not ideal way to talk about and expand power. Mostly because games are about power. They're about rules, and we get to compete and we get to win. What's core about play is that the rules are explicit and can be negotiated.
Mm-hmm.
In play, players have to engage each other. And what people who study play have found is that even if you're competing, because not all games are competitive, some of them are cooperative, but even if you're competing with an arch, nemesis, you still bond to that person, because in order to really play at your edge and have the potential to win, you have to be able to anticipate the opponent, and that requires real tuning in, not only mentally but physically. The other thing about play is that any losses are minimal. So play is actually perfect for power, where we're often very nervous. We don't have the language. We're implicated, and we're coming across another that has those same things. So, yeah, game is awesome. And I think the thing about play that was really fascinating was that they found that animals in nature oftentimes chose play over food. And that was what really got people studying play and to think there must be a reason for play as an evolutionary strategy. And there is. It actually serves a really high purpose.
I couldn't help but think of the back in the 60s, early 70s, out of the transactional analysis movement. Great little book, The Games People Play.
I remember
Yeah.
that book. I think I have that one.
And basically, I think again, what's the deal there? So many times they play out at the unconscious level, but one of the things I think you do is you call them to our consciousness, and even identify some games that we could play that might bring that consciousness up and out a bit, like the party game or the yes but yes and game or the switching game. You got some neat games in here.
Yeah, that was that was a real gem for me as well. This is part of the discovery in writing the book, was finding that games were already out there. Power games were already out there in the field of theater, and I learned that through my daughter, who's a theater. She's an actor and she's someone who studies theater. But throughout her growing up, I took her to different events, and I learned more and more as I watched her grow into this. And eventually, I came across games and power games, and I was just blown away, because what I found was that in the acting field, the highest or the most masterful actor is the actor that can switch status, that actually understands these invisible things enough to play different status characters. And what they were saying is that, actors tend to be typecast. Even if they're playing a low character, if that actor is a powerful character, they oftentimes will play that character in a high status way.
Right.
And a real actor knows how to actually fully become the status of a character. And so many of these actors that really aim to play at that level learn how to switch status. And so these games are out there. I don't think they've been captured as such. They're part of the practices of learning to become an actor. And so I help to start capturing them and to start to really bring them into the field of social change and awareness in general.
You want to free yourself by understanding and mastering power dynamics? Well, the Power Manual is a good book for you. It's how to master complex power dynamics. What it really is an action manual. And it's ideal for anybody that is a change agent or who wants to be. The Power Manual, out from New Society Publishers. Cindy Suarez, our life strategist today. We'll be back in just a moment with our remaining minutes here on Strategies with Cindy Suarez. back. Welcome back into Strategies for Living. Here on 101.7 FM and 710 KEEL marriage and family therapist David McMillan, PLPC, Carla McCormick, and our life strategist today, Cindy Suarez, the author of The Power Manual. So, Cindy, what do you want us everyday people to take away from The Power Manual?
Well, I think the core idea is that power is enacted. It's something that we bring to light through our actions. And so, the thing to do is to seek to understand the power that you do have, work to develop it, and use it for the good of all.
I like that.
Yeah, so that's that shift between the liberating and the dominant, right?
Right, yeah, like develop the power. I think part of the challenge for people is that there's this ambivalence about developing one's power, but if we can see that we can develop it and use it for the good of all, which is the difference, then we don't have to be ambivalent. We can be clear and we can be unabashed. There's nothing wrong with power.
What kind of grade would you give us so far? How are we doing? Do we get a, when you look at society as a whole, do we get an A? Do we get a C?
No,
do we get a D minus? What do we get?
No, I think we're at the beginnings of understanding, and I think we're at the cusp of the need to really deepen our understanding of power.
Okay, so sounds like maybe we get a D minus right now.
We're just learning. We're just starting.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been working on it for a long time, but I think the times that we're in call for a shift in that. So I do think that the shift, and that I'm hoping to contribute to, will happen, but I don't see it around me, which is why I spent the time to try to bring it forward.
If you want to learn more about true power, if you want to free yourself, liberate yourself, and understand how to master power dynamics, and how to have a little fun too, all of that's here. The book is called The Power Manual, How to Master Complex Power Dynamics. You'll find it out from New Society Publishers. Cindy Suarez is the author. Cindy, thank you so much for coming and being a life strategist for us here today on Strategies
Thank you,
for
David.
Living.
Thank you for allowing me to be a life strategist. I like that.
Yeah, you put that on your resume now, Cindy.
I think I will.
There you go. Folks, thank you for listening, and thank you for tuning into Strategies for Living. We've been presented by CADA, the Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse of Northwest Louisiana. Been helping individuals and families now for 60 years. Also by Jerry Anderson, State Farm Insurance, by Learning RX, by Highland Place Rehab and Nursing Center, by Jacobs Well, Inspirational Books and Gifts, and by Resilient House. If today were the last day of your life and you only had one more phone call to make, who would you call? What would you say? And why are you waiting? Make the call. For PLPC, Carla McCormick, for Travis Stewart, and for Cindy Suarez, I'm marriage and family therapist David McMillan. See you next time here on Strategies for Living.